South Africa, home to an animal that for centuries has been emblematic of the continent. The rhino, with its magnificent horn, a reminder of its prehistoric origins, has been revered by ancient civilizations across Africa. 80% of the world's black and white rhino are here, in the southernmost tip of Africa. Despite man's cruel persecution over the centuries, the African rhino has endured. At the turn of the century, it was thought that rhino had become extinct in southern Africa. A small group of rhino in the Umfolozi region, in a protected region in the eastern KwaZulu-Natal province of the country, provided the breeding pool for today's white rhino population. In the 1960s, a dedicated group of conservation pioneers led by Dr. Ian Player began the massive breeding and expansion program that was known as Operation Rhino, moving over 300 white rhino back into habitats across the continent.
Well, from 437 in 1953, which was the first aerial count done, and I did it, so I know it. Through our work, we translocated the rhino all over southern Africa. And they just grew in numbers. And hunting was part of that, I might add. Because the rhino were hunted, actually increased their numbers, paradoxical as that might sound. Because the people who hunted had paid such huge sums of money that the ranchers were able to buy more land and therefore have more rhino. And not only that, more habitat for other species as well.
South Africa's efforts brought the rhino back from the brink. In 2010, southern white rhinos around the world numbered more than 21,000 from around 600 when Operation Rhino began.
That is a great conservation success story. And we commend South Africa in particular, which has over 90% of those rhinos within its borders.
But poaching threatens to undermine this success story, as transnational organized criminal syndicates infiltrate our borders to carry out their grim trade. The epicenter of the poaching epidemic is here, along the eastern boundaries of the Kruger National Park. The Kruger National Park stretches over 19,000 square kilometers from the uppermost province of Limpopo and Zimbabwe border in the north to the southernmost tip of Mpumalanga in the south. Today, the Kruger conserves the largest rhino population in Africa. Ironically, South Africa's success with rhino conservation has turned us into a target. Rangers in the Kruger National Park are on the front line, battling as many as 3 armed incursions per day, as well-armed poachers enter the park in an attempt to get their hands on rhino horn. Rhino poaching forms just one part of the transnational illicit wildlife trade. The illegal trade in the body parts of endangered species generates $10 billion a year, ranking alongside drugs, arms, and human trafficking. It is a trade that crosses national boundaries and is run by well-armed, well-funded syndicates with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Since 1970, the trade in rhino horn has been prohibited by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, also known as CITES. Until 2008, there was a limited and controlled domestic trade in rhino horn in South Africa. It is here, in parts of Asia, that the demand for rhino horn exists. From cancer treatment to reducing fever to a hangover cure, there is a seemingly insatiable demand that is fueling the illegal trade. Worryingly, some studies show that rhino horn had become a status symbol among the wealthy. It has become the ultimate way for the rich to flaunt their wealth, possessing part of a critically endangered animal thousands of miles away. South Africa is fighting back. The Integrated Strategic Management of Rhinoceros is the government's multidisciplinary strategy to fight poaching. The Department of Environmental Affairs, working with the Ministers of Police, Defense Ministry and Justice, has led the implementation of the strategy. Working with international donors, South Africa has been able to devote substantial resources to the fight against poaching and boost support for teams on the ground, especially the Ranger Corps. In December 2015, South Africa's President Jacob Zuma visited the Kruger National Park to officially open the Mission Joint Operations Center, demonstrating that rhino poaching is receiving the highest level of attention as a national priority crime. The Joint Operations Center in the park enables real-time decision-making and reaction through live stream information, enabling the teams to be constantly one step ahead of the poachers.
I want to affirm once again that it is our people who are on the front line fighting these poachers, especially our rangers.
Donor funding has enabled South Africa to boost our anti-poaching work on the ground and includes the training of field rangers and law enforcement officials, K9 capacity, encrypted radio communication systems, access control, radar surveillance, and to pilot an unmanned aerial vehicle project. South Africa has stepped up cooperation with Mozambique in terms of a memorandum of understanding signed between the two countries in the fields of biodiversity and conservation. As part of this cross-border collaboration, South Africa recently handed over much-needed anti-poaching equipment, including a light aircraft, to Mozambique. Several memoranda of understanding have been signed with transit and end-user countries of rhino horn products. The most recent was with Cambodia in 2015. This was preceded by MOUs signed with Vietnam and China. Cooperation on the global stage to stop the trade in rhino horn received a further boost when the illegal wildlife trade was on the agenda of the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation for the first time in 2015. South Africa has been working closely with Interpol and the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime. In 2015, Minister Molewa outlined South Africa's progress in the war against rhino poaching at the Interpol UNEP Environmental Compliance and Enforcement Conference in Singapore.
We have a very good working relationship with Interpol. There's a lot that we're doing together from the point of view of investigations. Whenever we have a case of rhino horn poaching being found somewhere, Interpol is always there to work with us. And indeed, that partnership, we are saying, must grow from strength to strength.
Funding from the UNEP GEF Rhino program has enabled us to procure resources to assist with crime scene management and forensics. Also through support from this program, our scientists are collecting samples to build up a unique rhino DNA database that will eventually make it easier to link all poaching incidents with suspects. South Africa's National Prosecuting Authority has been empowered to extensively hand down harsh sentences to those found guilty of poaching. In late 2015, the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigation, or HAWKS, cracked a major rhino poaching syndicate. This operation was the result of collaboration between the police and the Department of Environmental Affairs. The suspects face charges of racketeering, rhino poaching, and corruption.
As South Africans, we are proud of this long legacy of conservation, which is why we'll continue to battle the illegal wildlife trade with all the resources at our disposal.
In 2015, the Black Mamba Anti-Poaching Unit from Balule Game Reserve won the coveted Champions of the Earth Award. The Black Mambas are specially trained environmental monitors introduced into areas facing high numbers of poaching. The environmental monitors play a leading role in educating communities on the benefits of conservation, but they also carry out proactive anti-poaching activities, including border patrols and removing snares. In 2015, the Department of Environmental Affairs held the Biodiversity Indaba in Durban, where various stakeholders met to discuss ways of creating sustainable and inclusive economic opportunities for communities in the wildlife sector. On the sidelines of the Biodiversity Indaba, we donated 4 rhino to the Nambiti community near Ladysmith in KwaZulu-Natal. Part of our successful strategy to make communities owners of wildlife.
It's about people's livelihoods, because the rhinos, the animals that we conserve, are about people as well. Anything that deals with environment must also involve the people, must involve the livelihoods of the people and the economy. So that's what we call sustainable development, as we understand.
Also, as part of working with communities, in 2015, our partner, the Peace Parks Foundation, facilitated the Vietnam Wilderness Youth Trails Project to train young Vietnamese to become anti-poaching activists back in their communities. A similar venture, the Chinese Youth Ambassadors, was also launched in 2015. South Africa is at the forefront of the conservation of the world's rhino. The integrated, multi-sectoral approach to dealing with this problem is slowly yielding success, but we know the battle is far from won.
Protecting the rhino is not the work of one person alone. Today, we call on all South Africans, as well as our foreign friends and partners, to join us in this fight. We share a common goal to protect and conserve the rhino for our children and our children's children. If we work together, we will succeed.